Good evening and welcome to this end of year special meeting of the board. Joy, would you take the roll?
Mr. Wycliffe?
Here.
Mr. Boyd?
Here.
Mr. Beveridge?
Here.
Mr. McCune? Ms. Schultz?
Here.
Ms. Felter? Mr. Geary?
Here.
All right. First off, before the consent agenda, we need a resolution to establish regular meeting dates for next school year, next year.
So I move to adopt the resolution to establish regular meeting dates for the school year at the July meeting times and locations per Kansas statute.
Second.
All right. I have a motion by Ms. Schultz, a second by Mr. Geary.
Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Mr. Beveridge?
Yes.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Geary?
Yes.
Mr. Wycliffe?
Yes. All right, moving on. Section 2 action consent. Did anyone have anything that they would like to pull off for further discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve consent agenda items numbered 2.01 to 2.06 as presented.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Boyd, second by Ms. Schultz.
Mr. Beveridge?
Yes.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Geary?
Yes.
Mr. Wycliffe?
Yes.
Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
All right, moving on. We've got just a handful of bids, contracts. Did anyone have any questions or would like some further information or discussion on any of these items? Okay, I think most of these are things that we have talked about in the past. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I move to approve action bids, contracts, and agreements 3.01 through 3.05 as presented.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Geary. I'm going to give Mr. Boyd that second.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Geary?
Yes.
Mr. Wycliffe?
Yes.
Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Mr. Beveridge?
Yes.
All right. The main reason that we have this meeting every year, approval of 2020 year-end transactions. Mr. Hutchison, do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
I would love to. Let me just share my screen real quick, walk you through the numbers. That time of year again where I come to you in order to comply with state statute and some of our board goals. As you all know, anytime we have purchases of over $20,000, Board of Education has to approve those. That's why at the end of each school year, when we do a transfer, it's considered an expenditure. And so as we close the books, we have to come to you. Thank you for your patience as we pull that together. We have to run 5 payrolls between June 15th and June 30th in order to get the books closed. We have to prepare all of our summer ones, so it always takes a little bit. I had Joy send a separate attachment. Obviously, you can't read this one. I'm going to walk through kind of section by section, but if you wanted to see the whole thing, it should be in your email. One moment, let me move you out of the way. The yellow highlighted column are the transfers that you'll be approving tonight, but I'd like to walk through and kind of explain the change in the reserves or fund balances for each of the funds. There's an explanation at the bottom of that sheet that tells you the main reason for some of the changes. But federal funds, as you know, we always have to request reimbursement after we've spent the funds, and therefore that's why that sits in a negative, and it's down about $300,000 from last year. The LOB or supplemental general funds up about $300,000. We can't spend that or save that. That will roll forward and reduce the tax levy for next year. At-risk bilingual and virtual education funds, we always bring those funds back to a $50,000 balance. It's sort of a starting cash flow for those funds. Or if there was an expenditure that we were not aware of as we were closing the books, there'll be a small cushion there to absorb that. Capital outlay is down about $2.3 million. If you were to look at the agenda item from last year, we actually anticipated spending more right before June 30th. And so the balance went up because those expenditures didn't occur until July. As they came through in July, it pulled it back down to where we anticipated. That's the reason for that decrease. Drivers, trains, close. Food service is the most significant change this year. The reason for that is, although we received meal reimbursement for our free and reduced lunches that we were preparing, the state order was to continue to pay all employees. Without the other food revenue coming in, those expenditures were going out, and it eroded the food service balance. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Professional development's another one that we just maintain an even $50,000. Parents as teachers. We're also the head of the Parents as Teachers Consortium, which just means we keep the books of several school districts, PAT, on our books, and it had a slight change. Summer school, a small increase. Special education also had an increase this year, mainly caused by, with the fourth quarter shutdown, we made some adjustments in transportation, and it saved special education funds, which will be very handy. Oftentimes we have to transfer additional funds into special ed. We've kind of been letting that click down over the last couple of years. Now we can help build that back up, and they may have additional services as we go into these uncharted territories for the next year or two. Cost of living, slight increase. Once again, that rolls forward to take care of the reduced next year's levy. We set vocational ed back at its $50,000. Gifts and grants is up, and you would think, well, if somebody gave us a gift, don't we have to get that expended before year end, even if we were shut down? Most of that is foundation funds, and they've agreed to just wait till we're back into session, and then those funds will be spent. Special liabilities up slightly. That's there to help with some of our legal issues, and we just didn't expend as much as it. Extraordinary growth, or CODA or BODA, is down to, and once again, that is just a matter of collection rate, and therefore the 119,000 rolls forward to help offset next year's levy. Healthcare reserves down slightly. Our claims are up a bit over this same time last year, so it's still a healthy reserve, but reduced by about $500,000. Risk management is flat. Workers' compensation, we maintain at $1.8 million. CAPERS is an in and out. The contingency reserve is up $3.6 million. In essence, when we were ordered to shut down, we aggressively made changes in operations. We shut down HVAC units to save utilities. We negotiated on transportation contracts. Obviously, sub costs would reduce. So we were trying to do whatever we could to build a bit of a contingency for the future. And I'll speak to that in just a moment. Textbook, it goes up and down each year, but it's up about 140,000. District activity, similar explanation. It's up because we generated revenue from district athletic and activity events, but didn't have a fourth quarter of sports that some of the expenditures would have occurred in. Bond and interest is down. We're at the peak of that debt curve, so we're going to start eroding that fund balance. Special assessment, slide left, and bond and interest, bond or construction funds. Obviously, we haven't had a bond issue since 2016, so we're just depleting that fund. And a lot of the aging facility work and the new construction is all done. The remainder is mostly technology funds. Student activities up once again. Collections were made, not unable to spend them when we were closed. So the total transfers for this evening are $25 million. That doesn't mean that was a surplus that we're transferring out of anywhere. Some of these are routine. We just normally, you see a treasurer's report that you approve that allows us to make those changes. In looking at, I always try to show this slide so you understand that there are there are operational reserves and there are restricted reserves. The ones that we could use for operations are up $4.5 million. Usually these don't move a whole lot, but as I said, because of the shutdown, we were able to garner some savings. The restricted side, we can't do much with, and actually they're down this year. So why do I always focus on this whole thing about reserves? We've had this conversation about the lean months of December and May. We need reserves for cash flow. In the past, we've always been concerned about rescissions, and I think that concern is a little bit heightened, even though the governor has agreed to fund our formula at the level anticipated by the court for next year. And it's just good, fiscal responsibility to have cash and reserves, and so that we have that flexibility for the future. So what's all this mean? In a nutshell, as I said, food service took the greatest hit. We could have transferred funds to try and shore that up, but we wanted to remain a little bit flexible. We could do that next year if that fund would run into troubles. Instead of having 3.7 increase in our contingency reserve, we could transfer more to food service. Special education saw that increase because of some of the savings they experienced, and a variety of our other reserves that are tied to programs that were not in operation in fourth quarter were also increased. But this kind of positions us really well for next year, that if revenues really suffer at the state level and rescissions or cuts are reality, we'll have that contingency reserve to lean on. If we don't need it for that purpose, I've kind of been beating that Boda drum. It will help ease as we start to talk in our budget cycle about this revenue source that's going to start decreasing for us. That will help kind of ease that over for a couple of years. This is the first step actually of our culminating step for this fiscal cycle. Now we'll start our budget process at the 21st. We'll have a preliminary budget for you. You'll approve the publication of the notice of hearing. We'll put that in the paper on the 24th for the August 6th board meeting. Everything has to be filed by August 25th. We do that early just in case there's any printing errors. You hear horror stories of districts across the state that have newspapers kind of mess up their notice of hearing, and you have to have that very accurate. If there's a mistake, we'd have plenty of time to adjust for that. And with that, I will answer any questions.
All right, questions for Mr. Hutchison?
John, I was just going to ask real quick, do we have any sense of property valuations, what that looks like this year, long-term, anything like that?
Final, we do not have for about another week. In January, February timeframe, we got our preliminary numbers that overall it's about a 5.3% increase, and it's pretty evenly split for commercial and residential. But there's quite a few abatements stuck in the pipeline. COVID really slowed the Board of Tax Appeals down. So we've been warned, plan ahead for when we get our final numbers and even after that. So I'm going to anticipate mid fours, like 4.5% assessed valuation growth because of that pent up appeal process.
Okay, thanks.
It's good to know. Others?
I was just going to ask, I know it's not a significant number, but the change in summer school, did we have any expenses related to that, or how did that?
Summer school really isn't, we really don't have any expenses related to that. And driver's ed was delayed. So
Okay.
Those two are victims of COVID shutdown as well.
Very good. Others? Right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve end-of-year transactions for fiscal year 2020 as presented, and to authorize Mr. John Hutchison, Deputy Superintendent for Business and Operations, to make any necessary adjustments to these transactions in order to properly close fiscal year 2020. I made it so easy.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Ms. Schultz, a second by Mr. Geary.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes.
Mr. Beveridge, Mr. Beveridge,
Yes, sorry, taking myself off mute.
Ms. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Geary,
Yes.
Mr. Whitcliffe.
Yes. All right. You can see 2 future action items on your agenda. I know we've already had a couple of questions on those, so would encourage board members, as always, to send those to the appropriate places so that you can get those answered. And if we need to have any discussion on them at our next meeting, we can. We do not require executive session this evening. So with that, if there are no other comments or questions, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Have a good
Cheers.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Fiscal.